section of ways that we can use art to help interpret text and to really get students engaged with text, and also different ways we can use language. Student agency. Someone tell me what's wrong with this one. I'm meek and I'm here for my inheritance. What's wrong with it? What does it miss? Look at the way the letters are written. The exclamation marks, the capitals, the huge letters. They are anything but meek. Bit like some people who claim they are ever so humble. So you can use something that actually misses the point. Get the children to engage with the text and work out how the artist in this case has got it wrong. And I'm going to use lots of sorts of images. Many of them will be traditional, and the reason for that is copyright. You have a handout on your desk that will give you lots of websites to use. In this case, Kerry Latimore does icons of each of the Beatitudes. Good one to look at. This comes from a site called Art in the Christian Tradition. Engaging with an artwork. Now, you will find questions that help students engage with artwork, because if you just give them an artwork and they look at it and think, it's old, what's it got to do with me? So I'm just going to ask you to look at this one, late 18th century William Blake. Just tell me what you see. Just say what you see. Nothing, I'm not asking for anything profound. Yeah, but that's more profound than I was hoping for. There's 3 people, thank you, there's 3 people. Tell me what you notice about the 3 people. Sorry? No shoes, barefoot, sorry, absolutely, no shoes. And actually, one of those pairs of feet is really important. So hang on to the bare feet. Anything else? Yep. They're all women, yes. It is Naomi. Ruth clinging to her where she makes that wonderful speech, you know, entreating not to leave that one. And then Orpah, who weeping is persuaded to go away. Naomi had buried her husband and her sons. She was a refugee, had to leave because of her famine, and these are the feet of a refugee. These are the hands of a woman who has dug graves for her husband and her sons. Look at her body language. Ruth is embracing her. What's Naomi doing? Sorry?
She's not giving a lot of love back, is she?
Yeah, it could be saying she's not giving a lot of love back. But we know when we engage with the text that actually she's very fond of this. Here's a woman trying to make it easy for Ruth to leave. I'm not going to hug you, I'm not going to make a great scene of it. I remember seeing our youngest off to university and think, no, I mustn't cry, I mustn't hug him, particularly not in front of his friends. You stay calm and you let them go. She's letting them go. And this is an enormous sacrifice for Naomi. She's got to walk all the way back to Bethlehem. It's a long climb, walk down and a long climb up, 4,000 feet. An older woman on her own. She'll have no one to work for her to support her. She's just sent away, or she's trying to send away, her support for the future. You painted this one in the same year. This is Christ with the apostles. behold my hands and feet. Look closely at Christ. Painted in the same year? You actually can put one on top of the other. They're both standing there like that. And there's Jesus saying, behold my hands and feet, showing the marks of sacrifice. Here we have Ruth, showing the marks of death. And this is her moment of sacrifice. But Blake is putting her in a resurrection pose. She thinks this is the end. She goes back to Bethlehem. She says, don't call me Naomi, which means pleasant. Call me Mara, bitter, for the Lord has dealt harshly with me. She's lost everything. Her feet are marked with hard work and the feet of a refugee. Blake is interpreting this in a way maybe we haven't thought of. That actually, that road to Bethlehem where she stops and she sends the girls away is her moment of sacrifice, because she thinks everything's come to an end. She's lost her husband, she's lost her son. But by putting her in a resurrection pose, Blake is saying ends can become beginnings with God. And we know that from the rest of the story of Ruth. Right at the end, it is baby Obed is a son born to Naomi, if you look at the end of Ruth. And so artists can help us interpret a text, working with the students, going backwards and forth, getting them to express their opinions about what they think about the artist's interpretation. And you may even notice he gives Naomi a halo. Can you see the halo? Beyond the nativity play, I'm sure, do you have nativity plays in your schools, primary schools particularly? Yes. They're often quite sentimental, fine, primary level, but we do have to get beyond this. And one of the come in her Bible, and I think Gabriel was hoping for a better reception. Mary looks decidedly grumpy. When I do this with people, I usually bring a sort of shawl with me. Look at how she's holding her clothes. Look at her body language. I usually put people in the body language. What is it saying to you? That body language, that way she's holding her clothes. Go away. Is she welcoming this approach? She doesn't feel safe. Thank you. She doesn't feel safe. She's turning her body away. She's wrapping herself around. She's defending herself. And the angel's words creep across the painting. And of course they open with, fear not. Not just fear of seeing an angel. Here, it was probably a middle teenager, you married young, probably talking about someone about 15. And she would have had all the normal dreams of a future. Marrying Joseph, she was already betrothed, which was the first stage of marriage. It was not an engagement. Having children, bringing up a family together. And here comes this angel, wiping out that future and asking her to do something extremely dangerous. It counted as adultery for her to have a child that wasn't Joseph's. The penalty was death. Now, the Romans didn't allow the death penalty, although lynchings happened, but she faced public humiliation, rejection by Joseph, her family, and destitution. And you just couldn't go off and get a job. The courage shown by Mary is quite extraordinary. And sometimes artists can help us see that in a text, which may get overlooked. The angel, you can see he's just arrived, his cloak is still, in the case of the angel has landed, his cloak is still flapping. and the news he brings is not welcome. Mary, if she is given the option, she can say no. Her thumb's in her Bible. She can just carry on reading her Bible when this angel goes and have an ordinary life. Being a devout believer, she would not be rejecting God. What she could have said no to was something extraordinary rather than just an ordinary future. So you can look at how artists across time have interpreted stories with students and across cultures. There are some fantastic Indigenous Australian ones. I'm afraid copyright is rather expensive, but I can recommend Christina Young Being and Grace Cumby particularly. Frank Wesley is an Indian artist who moved to Australia. None of your sort of Victorian white night dresses and tinsel halos, you know, these are not flappy, effeminate figures. This angel is blue and black and sweeps in and touches Mary's feet. Does anyone know the significance of touching Mary's feet? It is a sign of respect in many Indian cultures. And so he's using his own culture. Mary was the bottom of the heap. She was young, she was female, she had not yet married and produced a son. And here is an angel, one of God's chief angels, touching her feet, saying, you might be at the bottom of the heap in terms of everybody else's eyes, but not in God's. This is Henry Salvatana, African-American, who did go to Israel, and he's one of the few who does paint Mary as a middle teenager, poor, Palestinian, and the angel becomes a bar of light that crosses a show and makes a cross shape in the corner. And Mary here is not frightened. It's a different part of the story. And you have to look at the text with students and say, okay, which part of the story has this artist chosen as really important? And for this artist, that moment when she says, be it unto me, as God wills. And so you can explore paintings with them, use some of the questions that are on the sheets. You can also look at some unusual ones. Is there anything unusual you notice about this particular crucifixion? Different to anything you normally see the way Christ is crucified? Yeah, the feet don't actually look as if they're nailed. You're quite right. Yeah, the feet. Now look at the arms. Is that the normal position for the arms? No, it's not. So the arms are outstretched. His back is absolutely straight. In medieval, and many medieval ones, you get that S-shaped slant position and the arms are in a way. That particularly, it was around earlier, but particularly after St. Francis, that came in to really emphasise the humanity of Jesus, and you've got the more suffering Christ. Early Christians did not paint, on the whole, a suffering Jesus. First of all, crucifixion wasn't banned until Constantine in the 4th century, and they did not want to paint or draw or sculpt crucifixions. They saw those. They were in danger of those. The last thing you wanted to do was go around having images of that. They were outside the city gates on the main road. It was part of life. So you don't want to go around creating images of a crucifixion that you see every day. Instead, this is after the crucifixions were banned, they still tended to paint what's called the victory Christ. This is where the cross becomes Christ's throne of power, not his place of suffering. This is where he defeated sin and death. So this is the goddess of victory. You would have seen her all around the town. People they would have been sculptured on the buildings. They were all, does anyone know her other name? And it's to do with a sports company. Nike, thank you. Yes. The goddess Nike or Nike. It just means victory. And on icons of Jesus, you will sometimes see that word Nike, or some form of it on there. So it's very much, you can begin to look at 1 Corinthians 15 and that whole victory idea of the cross by going through a slightly unusual interpretation. Now, this is a very unusual Last Supper. Can you actually see Jesus? Anyone managed to locate Jesus in there? Yeah, there he is. Now, we have quite a lot of other people in there. First of all, there's a load of German guards having a tea break, where they're fully armed, they've got everything. There's a jester here with a parrot being hit over the head with a plate by another servant. This man's having a nosebleed, he's got blood on his hanky. And then there's just a crowd of other people from all walks of life, all countries, and there's a cat under there, and a dog, and actually there's the backside of another dog there. And when this was first painted, the people who commissioned it, they were quite happy with it. And then somebody grasped to the Inquisition. But there's this very unusual Last Supper. Would you like to talk to the artist? And so Eric and I are going to do the conversation. I just need to get my glasses.
I'm just thinking, Margaret, what does the Inquisition look like? Does it sort of look rough a little bit? It's not really working, is it?
I asked Eric if he thought he could do a sort of rather scary chief inquisitor, and he thought he could. So this transcript is actually still online of the trial. He got summons for a trial before the Grand Inquisitor, and so Eric is, and I'll be Veronese.
We have studied your painting of the Last Supper, Mr. Veronese, and we are puzzled. Why are there so many people rather than just Christ and his disciples?
It was a big painting, Your Honour. It's 39 feet long and 17 feet high. It'd look empty with just 13 people in it.
Who are all these people and what are they doing?
I forget, I painted it some time ago.
Why have you added Germans with battle axes?
It would take too long to explain, Your Honour.
Try me.
Well, it's a rich man's house and there need security guards.
Why is one man having a nosebleed?
I think he's had an accident.
But what about all these other people? 2 are having a fight, some are clearly drunk, one of the disciples is even picking his teeth. What's with the jester and the parrot? And why is there a dog?
Thank goodness he hasn't noticed the cat. Artistic licence, Your Honour. We artists take the same licence as poets and madmen.
Mr. Veronese, do you really think it's appropriate to have drunks, jesters and Germans at the Lord's Supper? Germans are not appropriate. Too many of them have become Protestants.
I'm only following the example of other artists who are better than myself, Your Honour.
Such as?
Michelangelo, he filled the Pope's Sistine Chapel in nudes.
That's different. What you have painted is not proper. It is not reverent. You could have added the Virgin Mary or Mary Magdalene, but instead you added a dog and a jester. It will not do, Mr. Veronese. Changes will have to be made. You have 3 months to turn this disreputable crowd into something more appropriate and get rid of the dog.
Thank you, Eric. Veronese had 3 months, and he decided he wasn't going to change a thing. Instead, he did this. He just changed the title. It's Feast at the House of Levi, a party for sinners. Now, we don't know what Veronese intended by painting this Last Supper. Having looked at all his paintings, I think he liked painting parties, quite frankly. But often artists paint more than they know. Feast at the House of Levi was a party for sinners, as we know, the comments from the Pharisees. But isn't that what communion is about? Isn't it a party for sinners? And maybe the Inquisition got it wrong. Maybe this is looking forward to communion. That actually all this rabble, including the German Protestants, they're all invited to the party, as far as Christ is concerned. This is from the Visual Commentary on Scripture. Absolutely brilliant site. It can be used in teacher preparation. So this is Rembrandt and Jacob wrestling with the angel. Look at the angel's face and look at the hand that's around the neck. Just look at the angel's face here. And this hand, just this hand, how compassionate that look is. And the hand is not tight around the neck, it's an embrace. And then you look down the bottom, the hand is on the hip and the knee is on the other side. This angel is about to inflict an injury on Jacob. Rembrandt's picked up something really important that in interpreting that story of Jacob wrestling with God, Jacob wrestling with the angel, that God will tackle us over issues that are affecting us and others and our relationship with God. Not a physical fight like Jacob. Frederick Buechner described this story, God in this story, as the beloved enemy. And this, I think, is what you see here, the beloved enemy. God who loves us, but when he sees us hurting ourselves and others, will tackle us over something. The other thing is to give students a painting with no artist, no title. What could that possibly be? Let's have a look. You have a man hollow-eyed, absolutely wide open, walking into the dark. But behind him, there is this tree, and it's dark at the top, and there are pupae all over it. But the light increases as you come down, and these creatures break out and fly. And right at the bottom, I think the lectern's obscuring it in the sun, there's the plant Lunaria. We call it honesty. Do you call it the same now, the paper circle plant? It's called honesty. Lunaria is its proper name. Personally, for me, this one, it's called The Prophet by Redon, a French artist. For me, it's always Jeremiah, Habakkuk, two prophets who were absolutely honest with God, didn't pull their punches when talking to God, but in the end, knew a very dark future was coming, but walked into that with God. But in both of those prophets, there is hope coming out of the darkness. And you can use a painting to explore a prophet's work, and it's facing the future with God. Many of the messages that these paintings enable us to bring out of the text, that are in there, but the paintings help us, are messages that these students will need to know. That ends can become beginnings with God. That we may face a dark future, but there is hope, and you can walk into that future with God. You know, that wonderful hymn at the end of Habakkuk, though the fruit tree does not blossom, that one. Then we need to know that. I'm now going to look at language and to look at the syllabus. Is the syllabus full of religious words and general language, and how are these going to be communicated? And what I'm going to be talking about is trusting the language of earth. Jesus did. He very much used the language of this world. Is there an emphasis on the spiritual as immaterial rather than expressed through the material physical world? Is there a balance between what is termed supernatural and what would be ordinary faith? Life is not all miracles. And going beyond dictionary definition and level of understanding, that's the grad grind we've been talking about, just being able to give a dictionary definition. To the possibility of a much deeper level of understanding, a more personal knowledge. Another way to think about it is thin knowledge and thick knowledge. That different types of language can help layer layers of understanding to create a much deeper form of knowledge. Right, I'm a bit of a pain to have to tea because I'm a vegetarian who doesn't eat vegetables. I eat carrots and peas. None of us eat vegetables. Vegetables is a general term. We live specifically. And if we constantly use general language, it means students aren't experiencing what's taught on a human level. So the big words that David was talking about, love and prayer and justice and that, we need to get really specific. If we leave it at a general level, they'll be able to give us an answer, but it will be dictionary definition and it will be really easy an assessment task. You can just tick the box. But we want to go to something deeper than that. Generalities can rob language of their power. Helmut Thielicke imagined a Nazi rally. And there was a Christian at this imaginary Christian at this Nazi rally. And they were going around shouting, Jesus is Lord. And he reckons they'd probably be ignored. But if they'd been specific and said, Jesus is Lord, and denounced pseudo-lords, such as Adolf Hitler, they would have been killed. So general language can rob our speaking and teaching of its power. But how do you get to specific language? The way you do that is to ask, what would this involve? And you have to be very specific. So I'm going to look at the baby Moses one. The Bible often has very general statements. 3 months in half a sentence. She hid him for 3 months, baby Moses. We all know, and if we ask the students what does that mean, they'd be able to tell us. But you tell me how you hide a baby for 3 months. I'd have settled for 3 hours, peace and quiet for an hour. How do you hide a baby for 3 months? Now, the most way out answer from one student I had was, you dress him in pink and the Egyptians will think he's a girl. That doesn't work. But think about it. The whole family is going to be on the shift system, keeping this baby's existence secret. The mother is going to be on-demand breastfeeding day and night. The father is going to be feeling absolutely powerless because he can't protect his family. And that's going to go on for 3 months, day and night. And you don't get parental leave. You're still a slave. In that exhaustion, in that busyness, and in that boredom of constantly rocking a child, trying to keep it quiet, and in that fear, can you see the hand of God?
Yeah.
Only looking back, I suggest, could they see the hand of God. And when we're working with students, is to get really specific into the story so that we are talking about real people in real situations. They are not pegs to hang doctrines on, like providence. You can get to that at the end, but I very much doubt Moses' mum felt like that. She didn't have anyone whispering in her ear, "Don't worry, love, it all turned out all right in the end." It didn't happen. With Nehemiah, it talks about people complaining that children are being sold as slaves for debt, because they've got in debt because of bad harvest and things like that, they're poor. And fellow Jews are lending them money, but they can't repay. So their children get taken in slavery. But they've got to decide. You can just talk about that in a general way. Or you can talk about a family having to sit down one morning and decide which child they sell. And what's worse, you've got to sit next to the person who demanded you do that in synagogue on Saturday and worship with them. We are where the text indicates that, we are talking about real people in real situations, and our language needs to get there. Universal truths. These are the real biggies. God is holy, all those sorts of things. The ones that don't change over time. But it's, the roots to those big ideas is through the particular, through the small things. So it sounds counterintuitive, but the more particular we are, the more we're down to the small things, the individual things, the more universal truths are seen to be. The media know this. Schindler's List, the girl in the red coat. You don't show masses of children, you show one girl in a red coat and what happens to her. Do you remember Schindler's List? Yes. And that gets across, strangely enough, the enormity that was happening to so many children. The fabric swatch. You take a piece of fabric and you look at it and you study it. And if you study it really well, you will recognise that if it's made into cushions, a set of curtains or a dress. Doesn't matter where you see it, if you really know it. So if we keep talking about the big thing, they will learn the answer to certain questions about the big thing. If we teach them the skill of recognition by studying the small thing, they'll be able to pick it out for themselves. So we're equipping them for the future, giving them a skill. Another example is Miss Marple. If you've ever seen Agatha Christie's Miss Marple, she lives in a tiny village in the middle of nowhere called St Mary Mead. She knows all the villagers. She's known them, the little ones since they've been born and they're grown up and they're now married, and she's studied their behaviour. And because she has got to know people in depth in the small, she recognises certain patterns of behaviour and that in the wider world in crime. So it's a counterintuitive thing, but it's that looking at text and really going for the detail and seeing how it is expressed in the small areas so that they can then recognise it in the big ones, in other areas of their lives when they need them. Faith is lived in concrete situations, and doctrines arose in concrete situations in the history of Israel, in Jesus' ministry, and in the early church. Paul's teaching arose in concrete situation in his life and in that of his hearers. So show those situations. Paul was not writing a systematic theology. So you have three narratives going on. The narrative of what's happening in Paul's life. You have the narrative of what is happening in his hearers' lives. And then you've got the narrative of the gospel. And it's looking at how those three are interacting in a concrete situation. And this is not anti-doctrine, it's a way of making doctrines live. Right. The spiritual is usually revealed through the material, the physical, and this world is still God's world, even if it's fallen, and a body was good enough for Jesus. I'm glad David picked up the word flesh. It often doesn't actually refer to flesh and body. It's about the fallen going away from God. The body is very much God's creation. It might be fallen, but then so is the rest of us. And God works through the body and through the material situations, through the physical situations we are in. So present biblical people and Christians as people with bodies, not just souls. Show how they interact with the material world. A balanced view of faith, not just a succession of supernatural events. So take Exodus 16. It's about a lot more than manna. The temptation is to jump to the two big miracles, God's provision. But the first two verses are really important. It tells you where they are, they're in a desert, and how long they've been walking. These people have seen enormous number of miracles in Egypt. All those plagues, and then the death of the firstborn. And then they leave Egypt, and the sea parts, and they walk through on dry land. And then they've got weeks of get up, walk, sleep, repeat. Day after day of walking. And that is very much what the Christian life is like, isn't it? It's not all miracles. It's learning to be faithful in the everyday, in our everyday job of teaching, leading, parenting, whatever. It is very easy to look at a syllabus and it may look all like a succession of incredible events. And actually, sometimes the biggest miracle is when people stay faithful when nothing big is happening. So have a look at the syllabus. The language of showing. Move to the present tense to tell biblical stories where appropriate, to avoid always talking about the past. It's natural to fall into the past tense because we're talking about things that happened a long time ago. But the prophets often do talk about the future as if it's already happened. This is called the historic present. You put it into the present tense to make it immediate, so that it feels as if it wasn't something that was from a long time ago. So I'll just do a couple. Josiah in the temple. So Josiah was given one of the people a money bag and said, go and pay the workmen to rebuild the temple. No receipts needed, just give them the money. Amidst the workmen moves a temple official, money bag in hand. He stops at each group of workmen and hands out coins. The look on the workmen's faces is one of total disbelief. Order what you need for the job, said the official, no receipt needed. Now the workmen don't mind this, less paperwork for them. But it's not the usual instruction. Normally the king requires a breakdown of expenses to make sure they're not on the fiddle. The official looks almost as amazed as the workmen. But these are the king's instructions, for the men have shown they are honest. The work begins with an act of trust. The temple must be built on the right foundations, trust and honesty. Can you see how you move it into... Most of teaching works on telling and explanation mode. Would you say that is so for teaching? If you move over to a more story-based one and use narrative a bit more, you can move into are more immediate, and are showing rather than telling. And when I say move from explanation to presentation or showing, please only accept them both. There are some things it's better not to show. One of the things is it is invitational, and it may appeal to modern hearers as it's perceived as less authoritarian than telling, because it allows people to make their own judgments about their own responses to a narrative. But you can mix explanation and presentation. So you can explain something, and you might need to explain the culture or what's happening, and then move into a showing way of doing it. I sometimes use a prologue or an introduction. Shakespeare used to do it. Right at the beginning of Romeo and Juliet, there's a wonderful prologue that gives the whole thing away. You know this is not going to end happily, and he tells you to have the paper tissues ready because they're all going to die. But he sets the scene. Basically, he arranges the mental furniture. You know what's coming. You don't know how it's going to come, but you know what's coming. And one of the things you can do is the teachers can give us the explanation, provide the framework, arrange the mental furniture of the class, as it were, and then tell the story. So they know how, in one way, to think about this story because they put it in its cultural setting. So, Mary, we've already talked about Mary. She was low in status, and you can explain how in her culture Mary would have been really low in status because of her age, being female, and not yet having produced a son. And she goes off to see Elizabeth. She would have walked with a group. You don't have teenage girls walking 90 miles to see a relative all on their own. They walked in groups for safety. So she walks this way for days, head down, using the cover of shyness to avoid questions. She's used to lowering her eyes. She is, after all, only a girl. Older women, boys and men take precedent over her. So you can include it in your narrative so that they begin to get the information as well. So they can see in their mind Mary walking and see how her status affects her. She's at the back of the group, her head's down. She's not pushing herself forward in any way. So to move to a showing form. This is David Schlaffer's, a very, very simplified version of David Schlaffer's thing about language. 3 basic types. Argument, which is understanding and proving. And at the end of that, you tend to get, now I get it, it's clearer, it makes sense. Yeah? Then there's story, and you get something quite different. You get recognition. Yeah, if you had that going to a film and you see a character and yeah, I recognise that sort of behaviour, or I felt like that, I've been in that sort of situation. It is not applying. It's different to applying. It's recognition, identification, and it's resonance. You know, if you twang one string on a guitar, it can start the other strings off. That's what you're going for when using a narrative. Setting up a resonance so that they begin to feel, oh yeah, I felt like that. Oh, I can see, you know, it wouldn't have been the same situation. And sometimes you can do it with tiny, tiny touches, what's called the reality effect, when you're telling a story. So Jesus, when he arrives at Capernaum, you know, he gets to the shore. So he jumps off the boat. And you can just talk about wet clothes clinging to his legs. Now, nobody in the class has probably jumped off a boat in the Sea of Galilee, but they will know the sensation of wet clothes clinging to their legs. It's called the reality effect. So that when you tell a story, a biblical story, you make sure it fits with the text. You pop in these little bits of reality effect that are true. We assume he jumped off of him, but it's got to fit with the text. But the text may not tell you that. So, if the text may tell you there's a high wind and that sort of thing, there's a storm coming, and you can talk about Jesus' hair blowing in his eyes or his clothes sticking to him with the wind. The text won't tell you that, or it's unlikely to. What you have to do is follow the trajectory of the text. If it tells you it's raining, it's wet. If it tells you there's a high wind blowing, you know from human experience what is happening to his clothes and things like that. And you can pop in these small, what's called reality effects. And the last one is image, which is about insight. And some of you may have this experience with scripture. I already knew that, and the words are the same, but now I know it in a different way. It means more. It means more to me. Have you had that feeling with scripture? A text you really know, you come back to it after some time, or maybe you've heard a sermon or you've read something, and you thought, I've known that text for years, and suddenly it's jumped off the page at me, and it means more, and you've understood it at a deeper level. That's what images go for. That can be both visual images, but in terms of language, it's poetry. I tend not to talk about it as poetry with teachers. I talk about lyrics, largely because poetry sounds a bit scary. Whereas we're used to lyrics, aren't we? Song lyrics. And song lyrics can sometimes capture something much bigger than if you try to explain them in prose. And poetry does the same thing. Can you think of a line from a Christian song or that means a lot to you, that maybe comes back every now and again? Anyone got a line that they particularly like out of a Christian song or a psalm? There is a smile there. Have you got one?
Because he lives, I can face tomorrow.
Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Let me be singing when the evening comes. Anyone got another one?
It is well
With my soul. The thing is, the whole insights thing is a nightmare for assessment because the outcome is blindingly obvious. It's the same but different. So working out how you term, on some sort of assessment is really difficult, but very, very worthwhile. Because when I spend a whole sermon getting across the idea that Jesus was the Son of God, and they already know that, but when you want them to want it to go deeper, so you do have to think quite carefully how you term sort of outcomes when you're using it. But it's using the poetic bits of the Bible, and there's huge amounts of them, not just the Psalms. Large parts of the prophets are poetry, and it often, small lines can just capture things. So think about, when you look at a syllabus, is all the language understanding and proving? Is there a use of narrative that might go for something different? And also, is anyone having a go at using the poetry of the Bible and how they're handling the poetry of the Bible, or even handling other parts of the Bible in a poetic way when teaching? Maybe using a poem alongside that really gets to the heart of it. How are poems of the Bible taught? Is the language used appropriate to the text? Now that applies to all the different bits of the Bible. That does not mean it has to be the same as the text. There are some bits of the Bible you certainly wouldn't want to teach in the same way that the prophets denounce. So it's got to be appropriate, it doesn't have to be the same. Take through a poem, use the form of logic that follows the images, the senses, and the moods. Being faithful is not about just repeating the content. It's about catching the feel of it by following the images. Don't reduce them to fonts. And poetry has its own precision. So, you know, those words from the Psalms that keep coming back to us, poets have always done that. When Stevie Smith wrote about not waving but drowning, a poem, Not Waving. It's a man out of his depth in the sea and he's waving for help, and everybody thinks he's having a lovely time, he's waving. But he's not waving, he's drowning. And she suddenly turns it. He's been too far out all his life. And you just know what that man's life was like. It was forever desperately trying to keep his head above water in his job, in his relationships. It was just that. And T.S. Eliot, when he talks about a man who measures out his life in coffee spoons, a really niggardly form of life, measured out in coffee spoons. When Jesus talks about life in all its abundance. So treat poems as poems when they are taught. So I will finish there. Any questions about the use of language or the use of art?